again. Injured on the field, you better make sure you die.
Meteor falls in Hamburg, Germany. The media reported that the meteor was carrying aliens who would destroy humans. 5 years have passed. These aliens have spread across several parts of mainland Europe. They call them mimics because these creatures are able to understand human attack plans. Then an American military officer named William Cage was heading to the UDF headquarters to meet General Brigham. General Brigham tells about plans for an alien attack on Paris beach. Brigham wanted to involve Cage on the front lines, but Cage refused, because he had never participated in the battle, but Brigham didn't mind that. Cage would still take part in the battle on the front lines. Before leaving the room, Cage threatened Brigham that he would blame Brigham in front of the media if this battle resulted in many casualties. Hearing the threat, Brigham changed his mind and abandoned the plan, but while he was gone, Brigham ordered troops to arrest Cage. Cage is now at the military base, greeted by Sergeant Farrell. At that time Cage asked to contact his superiors, but Farrell instead took Cage to where the Squad G soldiers were, and said that Cage was just a deserter. The next day all the troops were ready to go to the battlefield, including Cage, but he looked very confused and anxious because today he had to enter the battlefield. Hundreds of planes were flown to bring troops to the French coast. During the flight, Farrell provides input to strengthen the soldiers' mentality, but suddenly their plane is hit by alien fire. All the soldiers have to jump before the plane explodes. It was seen that the fight had started. Cage saw Kimmel being crushed by a falling plane, and while Cage was walking, from behind there was a plane that had lost control heading towards him. Luckily Cage was able to avoid the plane. And it turns out that inside is Rita, the soldier who managed to defeat hundreds of mimics in the previous battle. Cage witnessed Rita's prowess when fighting the mimics, but Rita was a little careless and was attacked to death. Cage continued to walk away from the battle. He met Squad G and Farrell. At this time they felt that all attacks had been noticed by Mimic. A moment later the Mimic emerged from the ground, easily attacking nearby troops. Meanwhile, Cage has now managed to control his battle armor, and immediately attacks the Mimic. A moment later a bigger Mimic appears. Cage intended to carry out an attack, but it turned out his ammunition was empty. Cage saw a bomb next to him, and when the Mimic was about to attack, Cage managed to detonate the bomb, but Cage was hit by blood from the Mimic and Cage died in this battle. After that, suddenly Cage found himself in a military base, with the same conditions as what happened before, including when Farrell approached him. His words were exactly the same as what Cage had experienced before. Even when they entered Troop G's room, they interacted or behaved same as before. The next day, on the plane was the same as before. When Cage got off he immediately looked for Kimmel who was about to be hit by the plane, but in vain. Then Cage intended to save Rita. Cage managed to save Rita by pushing her, but this time Cage was shot. Rita left him. Then a Mimic appeared from the ground. And time repeats itself. This time he tries to explain what he knows about the battle. He says that all the troops will die. Cage tried to convince the troops that he already knew the outcome of this battle. He started calling out the names of the troops one by one, but in vain, and finally they covered Cage's mouth. After entering the fight, Cage managed to save Kimmel, but this time he was the victim. Once again, time repeats itself, so every time Cage dies, he will return to his time at the military base. In this fight, Cage managed to save Kimmel, but this time when he wanted to save Rita, Cage was hit by a car. And returned to the military base and fight again. This time Cage manages to meet Rita after many failures. Rita realizes that Cage already knows from which direction the Mimic will attack. Rita then asks Cage to meet her after getting up. From here we know that Rita already understands what happened to Cage. Again, Cage remembered Rita's words, saying that he had to meet her immediately. It wasn't easy to find Rita. On the first try Cage failed, and yes, he had to start all over again at the military base. On the second try he managed to sneak in and immediately look for Rita. Finally Cage managed to meet Rita at the training ground. Cage explained the strangeness he was experiencing. Hearing this, Rita invited Cage to talk outside. Rita also added that Cage didn't need to tell everyone about this strangeness because it was impossible for anyone to believe it. They met Dr. Carter, a microbiologist and particle physicist who is trusted by Rita, and of course understands the strangeness that Cage is experiencing. Carter then explains that a Mimic is a single organism, and there are several types, including the large Mimic that was defeated by Cage. This type is called Alpha. The Alpha type is the rarest type, 1 in 6 million. Not only that, Carter also shows that Omega is believed to be Mimic Center, which has the ability to control time. In other words, when Alpha dies, Omega will repeat the previous day, and Alpha will remember all the events when it comes back to life. Then Rita said that in the previous battle at Verdun, the mimics deliberately gave in so that humans could launch a massive attack like now, and the mimics easily defeated the troops because Omega could see the future. Dr. Carter and Rita asked Cage to find Omega's whereabouts. There was no time to relax. Cage was immediately trained by Rita so he could fight the mimics. While he was training, Cage suffered a serious injury. Then Rita said that rather than getting hurt in the fight, it would be better to die, because Cage could still turn back time. Rita also said that the ability to repeat time has been lost since undergoing a blood transfusion. Time went on. Cage had to explain from the beginning and return to training with Rita. Again, Cage had to repeat that day because he was injured during training, and this scene continued to be repeated several times. Until one day, Cage saw Omega's shadow in a German dam. He immediately met Carter and Rita, then explained what he saw in his reflection. While in the fight, Cage and Rita looked for a way to get out of it, but their first attempt failed. Time repeated itself. They tried again, and failed again, continuing like that until Cage knew the direction of the mimic's attack, and made a picture of the attack map. On the day of the repetition, Cage decided to escape from the military base. He headed to the city of London. There Cage found something strange, where all the electricity went out and there was an explosion. Cage ran until he saw a group of mimics from underwater who immediately attacked him. Cage got up again. This time Rita saw that Cage's fighting ability had increased rapidly, while Carter managed to track Omega's whereabouts in more detail. In this experiment, Cage and Rita managed to get out of the battlefield. They saw lots of cars. Cage advised Rita to go to an SUV, because in his life Cage had tried several cars but they couldn't be used. And they were finally able to leave the battlefield, headed to a house. There Rita found a helicopter. After a while Cage brought Rita in to treat the wound on Rita's shoulder. Rita then asked for the keys to the helicopter to go to Omega's place. Cage tried to hold back, because he already knew what would happen, but Rita didn't care. Not long after, the mimics appear, take down the helicopter and attack Cage. Cage had to start again from the beginning. This time he decided to go alone, until he arrived at the German dam. There Cage found no sign of Omega, but he only met a mimic who immediately attacked him, but the mimic did not attack Cage further. Not long after, Alpha appeared from behind. When Cage was about to repeat, Alpha blocked him and only injured Cage's hand. When there was a chance, Cage entered the gap and drowned. The time loop occurs again. Cage tells Carter and Rita that the shadow seen about Omega is just a trap, and the mimic is not after his life but only Cage's blood. In desperation, Rita remembered the device Carter had made which functioned to connect Alpha and Omega, but for now the device was at the UDF headquarters, London. Wasting no time, Cage and Rita headed to the UDF headquarters. Cage seemed to understand the situation as if he had been through this before. They entered General Brigham's room. With a little negotiation finally succeeded in bringing the transponder. While in the car, Cage plugged the device into his leg, and immediately saw a picture of Omega in the Louvre Museum, Paris, but unfortunately, when they were about to leave, military troops blocked them, so Cage had to be shot in the leg. After he regained consciousness, Cage was already in the hospital, and there was blood flowing into his body. The ability to repeat time was lost, as happened to Rita. Cage is approached by Rita. She intends to turn back time, but Cage says that her abilities have now been lost. Before it was too late, they planned to invite Squad G to destroy Omega. Cage tried to explain what happened. Luckily Cage was accompanied by Rita, so Squad G was willing to help him. With great courage they left for Paris. When approaching the airplane museum they were attacked by mimics, so they were forced to make an emergency landing. Seeing conditions like this, they began to have no confidence in fighting the mimics. In the midst of desperation, Cage had a plan. He would force the damaged plane to start taking it to the museum, but when the plane started flying, the mimics appeared. With the remaining troops, they tried to block the mimics. While Rita and Cage were in the plane, they fought the mimics who tried to approach. After a struggle, they arrive at the season, and soon enter the crevice where they believe the Omega is hiding. However, when they entered, Alpha suddenly appeared and they divided the tasks. Rita handed the grenade to Cage to destroy Omega, while she would hold Alpha. Rita runs away to distract Alpha, and Cage continues to search for Omega's whereabouts, but unfortunately Rita is not a difficult opponent for Alpha. Alpha immediately chased Cage. He immediately jumped into the water which he believed was Omega's place, and sure enough, this was Omega's hiding place. However, Alpha managed to attack Cage from behind and luckily Cage was able to drop a grenade right in the middle of Omega. Omega exploded, because Mimic and Alpha were one organism. Mimic and Alpha who were still alive were also destroyed, but the explosion contaminated Cage with Omega molecules, and yes, Cage came back to life. He returned to the helicopter that took him to London. Cage sees the news that humanity has won the battle against the aliens. Not to forget, Cage also took the time to meet Troop G, who was training, and also visited Rita, whose position was the same as in her previous life. Cage smiled with teary eyes when he saw Rita, who was still alive. And the film ends.